Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Ladies Beyond Flying Aviation Women panel. It's the 35th meanwhile. So our journey started 8 July 2020. And we have another fantastic guest speaker who will tell us more that you don't have to be a pilot to be the captain of your life. Karlene Petitt, a retired airline captain. She was recommended from Noreen Newton, who gave us a talk in April. And so I Googled a bit about her, and I'm sure we will have a fantastic presentation from her personal experience. And if you have a question, please raise your hand or push the button in MS Teams, and then I will help Karlene to bring you on stage too. So, stage is yours, Karlene, and all the other, please enjoy.
Okay. Oh, good. I don't have to look at myself. That's great. Thank you so much for having me here. If you have anyone can see in the background, I'm in the woods in Mount Shasta. That's where I'm broadcasting from. But I wanted to thank Noreen, because when I listened to Noreen's talk, she had mentioned that something about we do what we do because where we came from. And I thought about what happened to me. Now, Daniel just told me this morning a Southwest pilot said I'm controversial. Never knew that. No, maybe within the airline industry. But what happened to me, for those who don't know, is at the end of my career, the last 10 years, it should have been the most fun out of this, what turned into a 40-year career. Should have been 50. What happened was Delta Airlines paid a psychiatrist $74,000 to give me a false mental health diagnosis. And the union was part of it. When this happened, all my friends, everyone kind of took a big step back. I was going to fight this. But I didn't know it was $74,000. All I knew is I gave him a safety report, and they're sending me into a mental health evaluation. Okay. A girlfriend at the time told me, she said, "What are you doing? Don't fight them. You're kicking the hornet's nest." And I thought, no, maybe they're kicking the hornet's nest, not me. And so, yeah, I did fight them. And it was a 7-year battle and 6 years in litigation. And I did end up retiring. But that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the next chapter. The end of this chapter is Delta lost in trial after 9-day trial. ALPA got involved through a grievance process and helped Delta try and take me back to court to make that trial invalid with a collateral estoppel claim. That didn't work. They lost their appeal. We were being sent back to court because this administrative review board said that my pain and suffering, that I was awarded too much, because compensatory damages under the law should be, they're usually like $50,000. The judge awarded me $500,000. That's how bad this was. This is what he observed in 9 days of trial. And this group that wasn't there and didn't see the false testimony and hear what was going on, they said, "Wait a minute, Judge, why did you do that? Delta, you're bad, you lose. But Judge, you got to go back to court and justify this." So now we're gearing up to go back to trial, which probably would have cost me another $300,000-$400,000. And I was gung-ho ready to do it. Okay. And we're deposing people, and then Delta kind of finally came in and threw in the towel, and they said, "We'll give you all your attorney fees and what the judge awarded you." Now, he did award me a little bit extra on top of that, but it really wasn't part of the law. Like he said, I'd get the highest paid salary of any first officer. Well, the law really wouldn't have supported that. So, but at that point I thought, yeah, enough's enough. It did not make sense to go back to court. But at that point, up until that point, my health sank. My adrenals were drained. I stopped producing cortisol. My body was just shutting down. And I'm thinking, this is really weird that finally I go through this whole battle, just stellar and fighting, and then my health tanks. And what's going on? But it was my perspective of what I was looking at it. I was looking at this whole giving, settling as I was giving up. I was letting them get away with it. But it was more than that, because I think what sustained me through this entire fight is I thought that we would hold somebody accountable. I was never about money. It was about doing the right thing. And that what was going on in the department, in that 45-page report that is still ongoing at Delta, is scary. It's scarier than heck. And so I thought, well, at least something will happen. Now we resolve this, because we do have a policy that says anyone who retaliates at Delta Airlines, because it's a policy, you cannot retaliate, is subject to termination. And everyone in my case was either promoted or retained their position. But one of the people involved was the CEO. And I don't know really his depth of involvement. I do know his depth of knowledge. He knew what was happening. We deposed him and we put everything on the table. He knew, he allowed it to go on. One of their attorneys told me that Delta actually engaged a war of attrition on me, meaning they were simply going to court and dragging this out to try and break me financially. Okay, so, but at the end of the day, they finally realized, for whatever reason, they didn't want to get their new executives deposed and have this become public record. And so they left. The senior VP who did this to me is now a CEO at Endeavor Airlines. The Ed Bastian's still there running the company, but he's a chairman of the board and the CEO. So who's going to hold him accountable? We know Steve Dixon was involved, and he became the FAA administrator. How is that possible? And then 2 days before our ruling comes out that Delta lost their appeal, Steve Dixon decides he's going to retire to spend more time with his family. No, the government, somebody told him this is coming down the chute and you're going to be called on the carpet for this. You know, FAA can't take it. That's going to be the news. My story hit the news not because of me, and not because they did this, the manner which they did it was because I was a woman. The guys there's been singular guys who've stood up, but they've been canned. They've been fired or kicked out of training. They've done the manly approach. But with women, we're crazy because we're too emotional, and how dare we speak out? And it's a very easy tactic for them to use. Since then, I found a doctor who told me that this is big business. This is a dirty business. The doctors are bought. Okay, the FAA knows, and they're allowing this to go on. So I'm thinking, what is going on with all this? Nothing got resolved. I went through hell for nothing, and my health is tanking. And I finally thought, you know what, I can do more. I can be stronger on the outside of Delta than on the inside. And I do not believe that any pilot should have to be looking over their shoulder thinking, what are they going to do next to me? We need, as pilots, to focus on our flying, not what's going to happen. Are they going to support this decision, or is this really a setup? Or they set me up in this airplane? I mean, think about it. Paying $74,000, they basically hired a hitman is what they did. And they weren't held accountable for it. The hitman lost his job. It took me 3 years of going at the Illinois Medical Board to try and get them to hold him accountable. And he finally forfeited his medical license. So did he really he's an old guy. Was he held accountable? No, he just said, I'm going to forfeit my medical license to avoid prosecution. So all this happened, and I thought, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? And I thought about this, I think it had to happen to me because I was the one that was prepared and willing and able to take them on. I think there's more going on here than just me. I think all of us have the opportunity to speak out and do something. Whether we do it or not is the real question. And I thought back to Noreen. How did I get to where I was? How am I this person of strength? I see Andrea's on here. She was raped, and Delta put her in a HIMSS program and then gave her a false PET test, a false drug test, so they could try and get rid of her. But she's a fighter, and she has 2 lawsuits against him. So where's her background and brought her to that? I think of Tammy Jo Schultz, and she's the pilot with the Southwest. That I don't know if anyone's read her book, The Engine Blew, the blade through the airplane, decompression. If you read that flying scene, so powerful. I'm going to tell you, 99 out of 100 pilots would have crashed that airplane. So why did Tammy Jo end up in that flight? It's because she went through hell in her life and she became one of the best pilots because she had the ability and the strength of fortitude because of her life. So I have to tell you, when I became a pilot, it had nothing to do. I didn't have any pilot mentors or anything. I was playing a game called Careers with my girlfriends. And we were on a game, it was a board game way back in the day where you could be a hostess is today's flight attendant, okay? So it was precursor stewardess. So you could be a hostess, a nurse, a librarian, a school teacher, or a model, okay? All my friends wanted to be hostesses, and so I wanted to be the hostess. And I couldn't get on the hostess spot. So I finally said, I don't care, I'm not gonna be the hostess, I'm gonna be the pilot. And my girlfriend, Karlene Moore, said, you can't be a pilot. I go, yes, I can. No, you can't. My dad's a pilot. He says girls can't do that. Okay. The funny part of the story is 8 airlines later, I end up at Delta. Her dad was a Delta pilot. Okay. So the Delta pilot, it's the only reason I became a pilot was because the Delta pilot told his daughter, you can't be a pilot. And she told me that, and I challenged her. So we're arguing, game over. And I went on and said, Mom, can I be a pilot? And she said, I don't care what you do. You know, get out of the kitchen. I'm cooking dinner. Okay. So I decided I was going to be a pilot. Everyone kind of that was a controversial thing back there for me saying I was going to be a pilot. So maybe that's my theme of my life. So I started babysitting, earning money, and just saving everything I could to become this pilot. So I went out at 16, I got my driver's license and borrowed a car, drove to the airport and paid them my money. I think it was like $15 at the time back then, and to go for my introductory flight. And the instructor, we walked around the airplane and he talked to me about the wings and the ailerons, and we got in and he taxied out and he says, you got it. I go, I don't got it. I don't know how to fly. And he says, no, I'm going to teach you. And so I had my hands on the controls and put in the little throttle and told me how to steer with my feet. And I rotated. We broke the ground and we're in the sky. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this is so cool. They're going to pay me to do this. You know, I was like, heck. So we go around and he lets me fly it. And then he comes in and lands. And so I get in the car and I go right to my high school. And I said, I want to be a pilot, right in the career counselor's office. And she said, you can't be a pilot. You have to go into the military, and they don't let girls do that. Okay, then. So my whole life, people have been telling me you can't do this, but that's okay. So I'm in high school, and I'm the DECA president of a little business club. And my teachers think that I'm really studying really hard, but I'm up in the back of the room during lunch break. They have the student store and all the seats, and I'm in the very back on this kind of tiered thing reading my economics book, but inside it was my flight manual, you know, and they think I'm up there being really, really this good business person. I'm back to reading flight stuff in high school. And so anyway, I got my pilot's license, and during this time, now this is a risque part of this talk. It was a streaking era. Okay, I didn't streak, but a couple guys that at the local high school got kicked out of their high school, came over to our high school because they were streaking. And my girlfriend said, oh, that guy's really cute. And I go, oh, he works at the grocery store you shop at. I'll introduce you. So we go over and I'm introducing her to these guys that I know from the neighboring high school. And we're chatting and they told me how much money they were making at the grocery store. And I go, are you kidding? Because at this time, I'm bussing tables at a Denny's in the middle of the night, graveyard shift.
You're muted.
You're muted, Carly.
Yeah.
How long did I mute? That was weird. Yeah. So they said that I couldn't get a job there because the owner doesn't hire girls. He thinks they're too bitchy and they don't work hard enough. Yeah, challenge on. So I went down there every day for a week. Now I have to tell you, I'm on a road trip for 92 days. This is my 42nd wedding anniversary. My husband is that guy who said women are too bitchy and they don't work hard enough. So, but he didn't hire me, and we didn't get married right away, but until I went off to college, and we kept in touch. So, came home from college. He ended up hiring me. I ended up turning into his best employee. The joke in our family is he married me because he thought I'd be cheap labor. I don't know. I showed him. Been costing him every day of his life. So anyway, we changed our plan. So because he was older than I am and we wanted to have a family. So I thought, okay, I'll have my kids and then I'll go fly. And so I went out to the airport at SeaTac Airport back in the day. Now you have to fill out applications and resumes, and some service looks at them and they go this process. Back then you had a resume and you walked to the ticket counter at the airport and said, I'd like a job, please. And you get applications, and that's how you did it. And so I was going down the counter, and there's this little company called Coastal Airways, and they said, and I said, hey, I'd like to come fly for you guys. Where do you fly? And she goes out and swim. And so this guy, the phone rings. She answers the phone, and she goes, oh, somebody here wants to come work for you. She hands me the phone. Turns out it's the owner of the company. He says, why do you want to work for me? And I said, to put San Juan out of business, of course. Now, I had just heard that that's who their competition was out there. And I said, put San Juan out of course. And he started laughing. He said, okay. So I went to work for him flying instructing his sons and flying a little commuter. But with the kids, it worked great because I had just total flexibility and it was local. But I needed a flight engineer rating. And so I went over to this place called STI. Now, I was dressed in a business suit, but back in the day, you didn't wear pants. Women had to have nylons and heels. Okay. So this was the professional business attire. So I walked into this training center because I needed to get that ticket. So I'm just, going to college, finish up in college, having kids, doing all my training, getting all the work. So when they're off in school, I'll go get my flying job. So I showed up and I walked in this room, and there's all these guys in there, maybe about 8, but 4 were sitting in a corner. And I walked in and they all stopped and turned and looked at me. And I said, is Bo Corby here? And somebody said yes. And nobody spoke. And I looked at him and I said, okay, and where might I find him? And this guy comes walking out. I know how tall he is because I'm settling, but I used to be 5'12". But in my heels, I'm a little bit taller. So this guy comes walking over to me and he stands right beside me and he looks at these guys and he looks up at me and he looks at the guys. He says, I like my women tall. And everybody laughs. So, and I know exactly how tall he was because I instantly put my arm around him, little chokehold, and grabbed him like this. I said, good, because I like my men small. That way I can keep them under control. Now, I got the bigger laughter than he did. And he turned out to be Bo Corby, the owner of this training center, and absolutely one of the best mentors and kindest, nicest people. But this is the kind of stuff, so it's like, how do you deal with sexual harassment? How do you deal with being told no? It didn't offend me because I just had that mind to come back at him with this. So anyway, I went in there and I got my flight engineer rating and a type rating in there on the 737, and he was my instructor for part of it. The most fabulous instructor. I could still hear his voice talking me through approaches when I'm in a new airplane, even though he's not there. It's like he would talk to me. He taught me about a scan, what to look at, and phugoid oscillations and real aerodynamic flying stuff. And so fabulous. And so now my new world is putting the kids to bed, dinner, putting all the kids to bed and going back out to the training center just 10 minutes away to study. And Evergreen was out there. And I said, hey, this is why I'm getting my flight engineer ticket. I said, do you guys mind if I just sit in the sim and watch? I've never done this before. Flight engineer, when I got into the ground school and they talked about a bus, okay? When we say bus, what comes to your mind? They're talking electrical bus. I'm thinking school bus, okay? This is how far behind I was. So they said, sure, come on in. And I sat there and I watched. It's like this choreographed play. And so I did that for 2 nights. Third night, the flight engineer didn't show up. It was a different crew, and they were going to shut down the training. And I said, I can work the panel for you. I don't have a ticket, but I can read your checklists. I watched what they were doing. And they said, oh, okay. So that's what we did for the next 2 days. And it turned out one of the captain getting his recurrent, turned out he was one of the chief pilots. So they called, asked if I ever got my ticket, and they hired me as a first officer down there. And they have professional flight engineers, so I'm right into the right seat. And so that was the Evergreen. And then that owner of that company, Coastal Airways, that I worked with his sons, he worked for Braniff. And he had 2 of his sons were flying for Braniff. So one night on a layover, they're all having beers, calling me, Karlene, you got to come to Braniff. You got to leave Evergreen and come to Braniff. This is going to be the new up-and-coming airline. This is Braniff number 2. And so I thought, okay, it'd be so much fun to fly real people in the daytime instead of freight at night. So I gave up the opportunity to go to the 747 right seat and went to Braniff and got hired. And then like months later, they shut down. So now I'm on the street with all these pilots. And so you can see I'm not the typical airline career that you get hired and work your way up in seniority, because every time you start over, you go to the bottom. Okay. So now my kids are getting in the teenage years. And I heard one of our chief pilots was at America West in management. So I called them up and I said, hey, Murph, I said, I'm Karlene Petitt. I was in Minneapolis with you. I said, I heard you're at America West. Is there any way you can get me a job there? And he laughed. And I said, is that a good side or a bad side? Kind of why you laugh. He says, no, you're my first new best friend that actually was honest with me, because everybody knew he went there. So he had all these guys calling him, hey, what are you up to? How things going? They weren't direct. He knew what they wanted, and I was the only one. He says, okay, let me see what I can do. And they called me back. He says, can you be an instructor? You're going to be locked in the training department for 2 years, no seniority accrual. You can go the flight line after that. And I thought, okay, this will be really good schedule with the kids at the ages they were, and I could commute and I could double session and be home every night for it would just work. And all the pilots are going, no, don't give up 2 years seniority. I mean, 1 day seniority can make a difference in your life, but they're going, don't do it. And I thought, no, I'm going to. And so I went down for my interview, and I was in this room. I was in my little skirt suit thing again. And I was in this room with this long table, and I'll never forget that Boyd Stevens was at the end. The 2 guys who were the most significant here were old Ween Frontier guys, and so, but they were significantly older. And I don't know, because I was young then, so who knows? They could be my age now, and I'm just calling them old. But one of the guys kept saying, you're such a sweet young thing. You're such a sweet young thing. And I just wanted to look at him and go, you don't even know. But he kept telling me I'm such a sweet young thing. And then, but Norm said, okay, what are you going to do? He says, what are you going to do if one of our pilots challenges you? You're not teaching it correctly. And I said, well, I'll come up and check with you to see if I am. He says, okay, that's good. And you go back down there and he argues with you. And I go, wait a minute, I'm teaching it correctly and he's arguing with me? He says, yeah, you've never flown America West flight line. You're just a girl. He says, I think he said, you're just a little girl who's never flown on our property. And what do you know? And I just sat there and I thought, oh, they're badgering me. They want to know if I can stand up to these guys. And so I looked at Boyd, the one who kept saying a sweet young thing, and I said, are we allowed to swear in here? And they all kind of go, yeah. And I leaned forward the table and I pointed my finger at this guy and I said, I'm going to tell him don't F with a flight instructor. But I actually said the word. Okay. So I really did say it. And they're like, okay. And then but before this whole scenario, because that one they said, okay, we're going to step out for a minute. But before that, they had asked me if I had ever instructed before. And I told them no, that I had 3 small children and 2 Newfoundland puppies. And that the way I looked at it, if I could teach children and animals, I'd have no problem with pilots. So they all laughed. They loved that. They thought it was funny, because these are all old school pilots. So then they asked us, and then they kind of froze when I said that. Okay, we'll be back. And they got up, scuffled out, went in the room, closed the door, went in the adjoining office, and I could hear them roaring laughter. And then they came in and said, hey, you want to go get a Coke? You're hired. So they hired me. And they dual qualified me, made me a 7.3 and a 757 instructor. And then my husband's business went away. So when my days off when I got home, I'm working in the sim, teaching for other companies. I worked for Bo's company, and I worked for another company called Global Air, and sim instructing in the middle of the night. And one of the companies got this Guyana contract to put their 757 into service for the expats. America West got the sim portion. So I'm working with these guys in the sim and these Guyanese pilots. And they show up the first day and they're lost and they don't know what they're doing. And they said, well, we were told don't do flows. We were told to study for a test. And I'm going, oh no, because they had flown twin engine aircraft. They didn't have any of the electronics or anything of these high jet. And even the 757's old school today, but they didn't have it. So they went and they were flying twin otters in the jungle. So I said, okay, let's just throw everything away. And I kind of started them with what they knew, the one instrument that they knew, and said, let's navigate with this, And so we started building the airplane back up. And Egbert he was a general in the Army down there. Great, big, huge guy, big muscles. And he goes, Karlene, I want to thank you. You gave me my bone back. And I'm going, you're welcome. And he said, I was the dog with the bone. He says, and I come to America West. And he goes, and I looked in this pond. He goes, and he says, I wanted all this knowledge and I had my bone. And he said he looked in the pond and saw the bone and he lost his to try and catch other one and he had nothing left. So I gave him his bone back and I'm going, oh, you're welcome. So I had no clue where that was even going. But I worked there for 4 years, and then actually before the 4 years, about my 2 years in, America West filed bankruptcy, and they furloughed everybody up through my class out in the street. I was still there because I was in training and didn't have seniority. So I'm still working for another 2 years for both these, and Guyana finally said, hey, will you come down and work for us? And so I did it through this other company. I wrote their training program, went down to Guyana. I had the guy who builds floats build me a simulator trainer, and we went down the jungle, and I taught him the airplane, and I went to Northwest Airlines to use the simulator, and we're in the middle of the night. So these pilots are thinking that who is this very tall woman with these African Americans in North NATCO, this in Minnesota. This was weird because they all watched us walk in and they're like, who is this person? And so they came over and started talking, and I said, introduced myself and what we were doing there. And, oh, you need to come work for Northwest. And apparently Northwest took applications over a month period, and then they spent a year going through them. So, yeah, but I don't have anything. And I'm going to bring you an application. So I filled it out in pencil, wagged my hours, meaning just I guessed, and sent it in. And then I'm working with Guyana, and we're commuting, flying in and out of New York, and somebody from Tower says, you need to come work for Tower. Yeah, I can't come work for Tower because I am the only instructor. I was the only person who was FAA and CAA authorized to sign these guys off. And we had to get there. I had to finish training them and put them on the line so they were all ready to go. And so I didn't ditch them. And so I went ahead and finished them up. Then I went to Tower, lost a few seniority numbers. That's okay. But I was going to be a captain like within 6 months, 747. So I'm psyched. And then Northwest calls out of the blue. And it's because of Bo. Bo went in there and told him, hey, Karlene Petitt's flying for 747 for Tower Air, and we really need to have her here. Oh, Bo Corby also worked for Northwest Airlines. He was a Republic guy, went through that merger, ended up at Northwest. Was ALPA training rep. He was a really good guy, very actively involved. So he's trying to promote me. So they called. And all along, Bo was saying, Karlene, you need to play at Northwest. They're hiring. Okay, Bo, thanks. But my days home, every job I had, I loved what I was doing while I was doing it. But at home, it was kids and family. And I wasn't looking for a job. I didn't want to go look for a job. So then this came into my lap, and I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know. So I'm commuting back and forth, and some people say, oh, ditch Tower, you got to go to Northwest. Northwest pilots are going, that's United. United tells me, ditch Tower, go to Northwest. The Northwest pilots say, don't come to this crummy piece of shit airline. Well, those were the Republic pilots who went through a merger. I mean, this whole merger thing's funny. A whole nother story, but anyway, so I finally decided I am going to stay at Tower. I'm tired of moving. I'm going to be a captain. I love what I'm doing. I'm staying here. Get back to New York, and the chief pilot tells me there's a furlough notice going out. What? I'm getting furloughed? Uh-huh. They always do this 2 months every year. I said, well, have a chance to go to Northwest? They said, go do it. So I went over to Northwest. All the women were little fluffy girl bow ties. Everyone was in their gray suits. The guys in their red tie. This is the Northwest look. And I had a ton of ties from America West because when I got down there, I was the only female instructor. And at the time, you had to wear a suit and tie in the training department. And guys said, that's not fair. Why doesn't she have to wear a tie? Okay, I'll wear a tie. And I got all the really fun ties, the characters and things. So my Northwest uniform, it was Halloween around October. So I wore my black pants and black jacket that I wore and a little pumpkin tie. And I went in, and everyone else, I didn't realize you were supposed to wear the uniform. They're all dressed like clones, and I walk in, and everyone at Northwest goes, wow, I love that tie, I love that tie, I love that tie, I love that tie. I'm thinking, okay, the tie is the thing. So I passed through that part of the testing, went over to the interview, and this is actually really good advice for anyone going to interview, because we all like to prepare, and everybody knows what's going to be asked. Okay. And so before I went in, there's this woman came out, and she said, well, I'm sitting in a lobby, and I'm sitting there nervous, for this interview. And this other guy's in there, and I kind of say, hey, do you want to practice questions? Kind of jokingly, haha, let's just chat a little bit here. No, I'm prepared. How are you prepared? I have all the questions. How did you get all the questions? He looks at me kind of like, where have you been? Because this happened really quickly, like within a matter of days. What I did is when I was going to Northwest, I called them up and said, I'm going to be an investor. Can you send me anything? They sent me a financial packet, so I knew where what airplanes they flew, where their bases were. I knew all the business side of this. And that's what I read coming back. I didn't get the test questions. I didn't even know they were out there. I'm like naive. Still to this day, I'm probably naive. I'm probably one of the most intelligent, naive persons there. But I'm going to own it. So he doesn't want to do this. So he goes up, and he's in there for a really long time, and he comes walking down the stairs. And I turn to say, how'd it go? And he just jets out the door. So Marlene Berman comes out, and she gets me, and we're walking up the stairs, and she pauses at the top, and she looks at me. She says, we already know that we want you. You're already qualified to be here, or you wouldn't be at this phase. She says, we only have 10 minutes to get to know you. She says, if the answers come out of your mouth before the question's completely asked, she says, there's too much preparation. I started laughing. I go, don't worry, it's not my issue. And she kind of smiled, and we went in there, and I was wearing a pilot Snoopy tie, by the way. It wasn't offensive. It was black, little tiny polka dots with little pilot Snoopies on it. And I went in there, and we chatted and had fun, and I couldn't remember the 4 reasons to put the oxygen mask on. And then one of the guys said, well, what about your I go, oh yeah, physiological needs. And he says, well, is getting a donut a physiological need? I said, if it's chocolate, yes. But I was relaxed, and I went out, and Marlene came out, and she says, we're going to offer you the job. I think it's your tie that did it. Okay. So then we went into training. Now here's the thing that brought my background. I ended up in this whole world of training to become an instructor, which I never had planned. Okay. When I got to Northwest, by a chain of events, I really shouldn't be there. The reason that furlough notice went out is because one of the pilots, I think he was a chief pilot, was living in Florida. He knew all the airlines were going to be hiring. And he was on his way to meet with this owner of this company to tell him, do not put that furlough notice out. You will lose your pilots this year. All the airlines are hiring. This is in 1997. Don't do it. And so they had this meeting scheduled. He's on the way to the airport and he got hit by a car. He missed his flight. He was fine, just car hit him. But that chain of events stopped him from getting to New York. Morris Nakatomi flew to Tel Aviv. Furlough notice went out. I left and go to Northwest. Otherwise, I never would have been there. Okay. So now I'm at Northwest and they're telling us how to bid on these cards. They said, but do not bid anything other than block, holder, or reserve. Do your status, because we got assigned our aircraft. And I was like smack dab in the middle of class, but I got a 727 right seat. I was typed on the airplane, had flown it, would be a piece of cake. But I put on my card all the wide body aircraft, 747 wide, captain, block, and reserve. So I put all these, it's my dream sheet. And they're like, well, don't do that because you might get dual qualified. And I'm thinking, well, I don't care. At this time, I think I had three different type ratings. I'd gone through training programs, flown airplanes. I thought it'd be fine. And I put the last thing was 747 instructor, even though they told us not to, 747 second officer, and I got it. So I was going to be dual qualified. They never did me on the 72, just at. Now I'm a second officer and I'm on probation and they need an instructor. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. I don't think I've ever heard of an airline hiring a probationary pilot and putting him in the training department. And I started writing training programs for them. And I'd identify a problem in the procedures. And I go right to the director and say, hey, here's a problem. And he'd go, can you fix it? Okay. I'd go to the hotel room, rewrite it, take it in to my boss. He'd look at that, looks good. I'd walk it down the hall, give it to tech ops. Tech ops would say, okay, great. Can you send it to FA? We would get these things done in 2 weeks. Okay. Richard Anderson was our CEO. Now we go through this bankruptcy, Delta's bankruptcy. Richard Anderson leaves, go to United Healthcare. Both airlines file bankruptcy, they merge. Richard Anderson comes back, bringing United Healthcare with him to this mega airline. No surprise. And I was out at the time for a hip replacement. I'd been putting it off. We were going to lose our sick leave, so I went out. But when I came back, I had to go to Indoc. And a manager said, don't ever call in fatigued at Delta Airlines. Fatigue is the other F word. And you'd rather be calling in drunk. Excuse me, at 4 a.m, you're going to call in drunk versus fatigued? I go, that, it doesn't look good. And then they're talking about the pilots who landed on the taxiway the same time the Northwest pilots overflew the airport. We can't talk about those Northwest pilots, but we're going to justify why our guys did what they did. And I said, excuse me, but that captain was ill. He actually was really hungover. It was the deal. He was hungover, got in the airplane, signed the release, should not have signed a release if you're sick, gets in the airplane, pops out of the seat and goes and sleeps the whole way and makes the other 2 pilots fly up and they land on a taxiway. It's inevitable. So these are the things that I'm observing going on. Simulator instructors back in the back texting, not watching the new pilots. So I think this cannot be. I'm going to go back to school and get my PhD in aviation safety. And I go down to Embry-Riddle and hear this word SMS. I'm going, what is SMS? And everyone's nodding and I'm thinking, oh, I'm an idiot. I go back and Google it. Oh, it's a federal regulation. Never heard about that one. Apparently Delta had one. They just didn't enact it and do anything with it. They didn't train the pilots, even though that's a regulation. So I'm watching this. I go to a safety conference and I said, and Richard Anderson was a keynote speaker and I recorded it. I learned later that he is the only keynote speaker at this conference that's ever said, you cannot record me. He didn't tell the people in the audience. He just told the facility they couldn't do it. I didn't know it, so I was recording. And he said every employee at my airline has the unfettered responsibility to bring anything forward they see unsafe. The unfettered responsibility. They can shut this airline down. Okay, so I try and get this meeting. And it took me this is in September, it took me for 4 months to meet with the two people to meet with them. In the meantime, they're trying to get me to go to HR to speak to EOC. Why? Well, because there's gender things in here, and I'm going, I don't know why they're doing it, but this has nothing to do with my gender. This is safety at the airline, and so no, I'm not doing that. But that was her whole plan. And so I met with them, and a month later they asked me if I'd speak to HR safety investigator. Sure. Turned out she was the manager of the Past Travel Complaint Department, EEOC. And so she had joint roles. That's how little they view equal employment opportunity at Delta Airlines. It's a joint responsibility to the woman who manages the past travel complaints. Okay, so this is her role. And I thought she was HR safety investigator, and then they put me away. And they said, you have to go, we're putting you in the section 15. And I didn't even know what it was at the time. And I did not find out, that was in March that I met with her. And I did not find out until January why they did it. They wouldn't tell me. And so until I saw my medical report, and I was bipolar, by the way, because as the doctor testified in court, she had 3 under 3. She flew and worked, and no woman could do that. And while we're sitting there, and I'm sitting in trial, and I'm listening to him. We didn't depose this guy. We didn't think Delta would be stupid enough to bring this whacked out doctor who's been bought off into trial. And it was like a comedy show. And if you could envision that movie, I think it was A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson, and he yells at them, "You can't handle the truth." Well, this was Altman, because the judge was asking him questions, challenging him. And he finally said, and he yelled it. And I'm just sitting there like this, arms folded, looking at this guy. And the judge is staring at him, totally stoic. And then he turns and he looks at me, and I go, it's like, what are you going to do? So, so why did this happen to me? What brought me to this? I look at all the different paths I could have taken in my career, my life, and why I even became a pilot. There are some really serious things going on at Delta Airlines. And if you look at this am I really controlling my life, or is there a higher power doing this? Because there's some really bad safety things going on at Delta. Nobody will stand up to them. Okay. I only become a pilot because the Delta pilot tells me I can't. And then every path I'm going down is preparing me for this battle. And I make decisions. I'll make a decision. The decisions that I make and go this way, nope. We don't want you to go that way. This airline's going to shut down. We need you to go over here now. And I make that decision. Nope. And so it's kind of like I'm making my decisions, but I'm kind of being guided and go through this training. So now I show up. In the meantime, I got a master's in business and a master's in psychology. And then I got my PhD in aviation safety. And I've been training for over 23 years. So I have the experience, I've got the aptitude, I've got the understanding from a business perspective, from a psychological perspective, and now from an aviation safety perspective. And I end up at Delta Airlines that has, and I'm talking, I flew some old school, look the other way, push airplane type airlines. This is the worst training I've ever seen, ever. And the worst culture I've ever seen, which for anyone who's ever worked at Evergreen, they called it the zone. They were flying the CIA planes. That puts it in perspective, okay? But I ended up here. Now, when this all started, I was also, ALPA told me, don't go do the testing, just go on unpaid leave. And I thought, how stupid is that? I'd never get back. And ALPA kind of threw me under the bus. They were giving me suggestions. When you go get your FA medical, don't write that you're seeing doctors. I go, no, it's required, but don't do it. You won't get your medical. No, I'm going to get my medical. And I wrote corporate political action. I'm seeing all these psychiatrists because of corporate political action. Well, the FAA knows what's going on. The FAA knows these doctors are bought. So they don't withhold it. And then the attorneys, I'm calling attorneys because in my mind I'm thinking ALPA's not helping me, but this has to be wrong. So I'm calling attorneys and they're all telling me, oh, you can't do anything right now. You got to wait until they're either going to buy a doctor off and say you're crazy, or they're going to keep you out long enough and mess with you in training. Okay, I can solve that problem. I'll go bid a different airplane. So that's why I bid the 777 because for option A, they're going to keep me out as long as possible. Well, now they got to put me through a whole new training program. They can't play that game on me. And then I finally found an attorney, and I dumped probably, before we even did anything, in the first 6 months, like $35,000 into him, and was getting nowhere with Alpha. And a friend of mine connected me to a law firm, and they were going to do a contingency if I dropped all the safety and said they're doing this to me because I'm a girl, because they couldn't prove they weren't. And I believe in my heart they were doing both. They did it because they want to silence me, but the manner which they did was because I was a woman. And so they wanted me to drop this. And I'm thinking, how much more money am I going to spend in? I learned many hundreds of thousands of dollars I ended up putting into this. But out of the blue, an aviation law professor from Embry-Riddle just calls me out of the blue and says, "Hey, Karlene, I'm just calling. I was thinking about you. I'm calling to check on you." He was an American Airlines pilot. He's an attorney, and he was a professor at Embry-Riddle, and I happened to have him for a law class. And I said, "You're just calling at the moment of my turmoil. I don't know. Here's this attorney. Here's this law firm. I don't want to be one of the, I will get my job back. But I don't want to say, have everyone say, oh, she just got her job back because she's a girl. Nothing, we don't have a problem. It's just she pulled the gender card." And I go, "There's serious safety things here. We got to get these fixed." He says, "Well, you need to call Lee Seaham." And so he gives me a number, and I called Lee, and I hired him for an hour just to he taught me this Air 21 law. And so he said, "Let me send you a couple cases that I lost." And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of cool, because I do cases. What attorney's going to say in your case lost? I called this other attorney and said, "Hey, can you send me your Air 21 cases? I want to read them," because I hadn't even thought about that. And he said, "Oh, I've never done this before, but it doesn't matter. It's administrative law, judge." I'm going, "Oh, yes, it does." So I hired that other attorney. I would have either lost with the first attorney, or I would have won and been 700,000 plus in the hole, even after winning and getting my award, had I stuck with him for the amount of hours and the money. And so it was like, I ended up, think about this, the one person who has been trained for safety culture, for the psychology part of it, for the training part of it. I end up at the airline that has probably, in my opinion, is it is my opinion, of the worst of the 8 that I've been to. And then I end up with the very best attorney who absolutely knows the law, is honest and in the highest integrity. And we get a judge who there's a lot of cases that he's ruled against the pilot. So everybody thinks that he's corporate owned, but he's an aviation safety guy. He flies his own airplane. He buys new parts. He's fair and he's just, and he's got a rule on the law, even though he knows sometimes that they're not doing the right thing. But in my case, we gave him all the tools to rule in the law. So I got the best judge for the case, the best attorney, the worst airline, and me. Something needed to be done, and this needed to happen, and I don't know why, but it's gotten, thanks to Steve Dixon, Delta trying to put Steve Dixon into the FAA, it got public. And that's the only reason. I wouldn't have taken it public. But there's a lot of people out there. I get hundreds of calls of people in crisis or things that are happening at the airlines like this, and a lot of them just give up and walk away. And it's like, so I ended up retiring. But that's not the end of the story. That's just the beginning of the next chapter. And I know everything that's gone before me, and everyone I listen to and talk to and learn from is something's next. Because I'm also an author. And here's something else for anyone who's gone through any challenges. Everyone says journal. It helps post-traumatic stress. Well, I took my journaling to the next level because I wrote books. And I called them fiction, but they're truth in this fiction. I actually took characters and I did perspective. But I was just reading a book the other day on your beliefs and your emotions, emotional control. And his suggestion in journaling is to write third person. When you journal, don't say I experienced and me and I and me. Write it third person as if it's somebody else. And he's explaining why. And I thought, holy cow, I did that through the novel, through the third person, through a whole different name, but that's what I did. And it helped, because when I went to one of the doctors in the Mayo Clinic, he looked at me and he said, "How are you sitting here with such composure? Are you in your books?" And I said, "Yeah." And I shared a story with them, with one of my characters, me, was telling the other character, me, that they might get away with this, but your life's not going to be over. It's just going to be different. And I had to believe that, because when I was going to the Mayo, think about it. You're putting your whole career, everything you've worked for your whole life, into the hands of somebody. And that's why, for anyone going through any of these things, go to a group that will, because what they do is you see different doctors, and then they have a whole panel that hasn't seen you. They just look at the results, because sometimes when you meet somebody, you have a personality thing, you might just not hit it off, and they don't want any of that bias in there. They have the doctors who meet with you and talk with you, but then they have the panel that reviews the data, and they go, yeah, based on the data, there's nothing here. So that's really a good aspect too. So, but anyway, that's the story. That's I think I was preordained or destined to just be here, but through the challenges of my life. Like Andrea, I know Andrea's on, and I know she's here for her challenges, and I know Noreen's here to share hers. And because challenges aren't bad, they're just, all those people who do bad things to us, all they are is our personal trainers to make us stronger for the next event. And if
this is, I would say, the shortest hour in my life. Time was flying, and I could listen for hours. And of course, I have questions. In the hindsight, I think you said in the 10th or 15th minute, nothing changed, even after you were reporting it. So would you do something differently, or would you go again through all this process with all the struggle, health issues, maybe losing friends, having this psychological pressure?
I would absolutely go through and do it again exactly the same way. And at one point I thought, if I would have got Lee Seaham earlier, what would have happened is, the OSHA process, this is an OSHA law, so the OSHA has to rule. They typically rule. Sometimes they take 2 to 6 years. I was already in that process by the time I found Lee. He let it run its course. We decided we're in no rush. Let's let it run its course, and then we'll appeal. What Lee does is he gets his clients. He knows what OSHA's going to do. He knows they're going to rule. They don't have the aptitude and ability to understand. He just takes the loss immediately and files in court. He gets it really quickly, and you get it resolved. At one point, I thought, boy, I wish we would have done that. But you know what? This needed to come out. We needed to find out the dirty doctors. We needed to get the discovery. This is huge. In our discovery, we found that Delta had 14 events that took down Air France. ASAP reports went in. The FAA knew that pedostatic system was a problem and that it was wiping out all the systems, and nobody did anything until 228 people died at Air France. Shame on them. But I found that in my medical report. My medical record. Delta gave it to the doctor to get me somehow. And so, but we wouldn't have known that. If we hadn't gone through this whole course, we wouldn't know what we know today. We wouldn't know the depth. We wouldn't know what they did. So yeah, nothing changed. And I shouldn't say nothing changed at Delta. I think people are far more aware of what's going on, and they're probably not going to get away with this again. So that changed.
And then I can imagine, just a minute, Noreen, you're next. Then I can imagine that you felt very often alone, having the system against you, the airline, the management. So you had your family, and you had potentially bad sleep. So how were you coping with the situation of potentially having somatic reactions to this entire situation? What gave you the energy and the power to keep the stance?
I'm going to say my husband. Our kids were older, the grandkids. So when I played with the grandkids, I went and did that. I didn't even think about this. But my poor husband had to listen to this. And how can they do this and that, but he was always, what was my determination even going forward with this whole thing was, could I live with myself with the knowledge that I had of what's going on here, and we had a crash and something happened, I didn't make an effort. And so that's really why I pushed forward. But I would say his strength of his ability just to listen and to empathize and be there was really it. And I'm going to tell you, the distraction and writing the novels and just getting it in there, because I wasn't whining poor me. I would go into my villain's character and make up stuff that he was doing. It was therapeutic too to attack. My best book is going to be Flight for Revenge. I'm working on the justice book right now. I believe there is really no justice, but then we're going to go right into revenge. That's going to be fun. Andrea suggested I write a book called Flight for Forgiveness, but that'd just be a short story right now. So we're going to just leave that on the table. but I really think it was that writing. I'm going to highly recommend anyone going through something and do it third person, because now I know that there's data behind it. I just took it that level. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Just I forget who it was, said write for the garbage can, meaning you just write it and edit it later if you want to, but you just get it out, but yeah, there were some very dark nights, and my friends people would call and, Karlene, do you know what they're doing and this and this? Can you come and support me? Can you testify to this? No, I don't want them to come and get me too. Kind of. So while the friends stepped back, they were still talking to me, and sharing what's going on, which we totally supported my case, but they were too afraid to come forward and they wouldn't do it. And I understood. I'm not gonna. Everyone has to do their own truth, and I never. I got it. I understood. So,
Noreen, you raised your hand. By the way, your camera, Noreen, is pretty fuzzy.
Is
Hopefully, we can, yeah. At least for me, it looks pretty fuzzy. I don't know for the So
it's fuzzy for me too.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
It looks like you're frozen a little bit, like your Wi-Fi is not quite.
I don't know. Okay. I probably have too much stuff open, but first of all, Daniel, can we have a Q&A or a discussion where it's not recorded? Just a thought. Anyways, you can record my question. Karlene, oh my God, I could listen to you for hours. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. And